Why was she the only one working while the others stood back, watching, laughing, throwing words like stones? Heat shimmered over the tarmac until it felt like the air itself was mocking her, bending and breaking the horizon. The Black Hawk squatted in the center of it like a wounded animal, blades sagging, mass ticking softly as metal shrank in the punishing sun. And under those blades, half in shadow, half in fire, was Lyra. They called her Wrench Girl, said it like it was clever, said it like it was all she'd ever be. She didn't answer, not with words, not with looks, only with the metallic rhythm of a socket clicking into place. Her gloves were stained, her sleeves rolled, her face streaked with sweat and grease that never really washed out no matter how many showers you took. The only rag she carried was gray with use, tucked into her waistband like a forgotten flag. A voice cut across the pad, loud enough to carry. "Careful with that, Wrench Girl. You snap a safety clip and we'll be fishing teeth out of the tail boom." Laughter followed. Quick, shallow laughter. The kind men used when they wanted the joke to sting without taking responsibility for the wound. Lyra didn't rise to it. She leaned closer to the mast, listening. Not metaphorically, listening the way a mechanic listens, with her fingertips and the tiny bones in her wrist, for the difference between a healthy tick and the metallic click that meant something inside was chewing itself alive. She felt the smear before she saw it. Hydraulic fluid, faint and slick, not fuel, not oil. Her thumb and forefinger rubbed together in instinctive confirmation. PRF 5060. She'd bled enough lines to recognize it blind. The line should have retired 1,000 hours ago. Instead, it was cracked like an old bone. Behind her, the heckler shifted closer, his boots scuffing the concrete. His smile stretched wider when his buddies nodded along. "Want me to get you a mirror, or maybe eyeliner? This rotor doesn't care how you look, sweetheart." Another burst of laughter, bigger now, emboldened. Lyra tagged the line with a clipped call over her headset, ordered a replacement, and kept working. The pilot who had brought this bird home swore the stick had vibrated in his palm like a tuning fork. Maybe a damper, maybe a misaligned blade cuff. A dozen tiny failures could add up to catastrophe in the air. She wasn't guessing. She was hunting. And somewhere behind the ring of mockery, a man stood still. Major Grant Mercer, uniform pressed, cap shadowing eyes that had seen dossiers and dashboards but not much sunlight. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched her with a kind of patience that felt like judgment. She wasn't sure if it was. The replacement line came in wrapped like a newborn, plastic cap still bright. She cracked the seals with her teeth, spat them into her palm, and pocketed the waste. Then with a practiced twist she broke the old connection. The flare nut groaned, then gave way with a reluctant sigh. She cleaned the seat, wiped grit, threaded the new line home. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The crowd had gone quieter, but not silent. "Hey, princess," the sunburned joker called again. "Want me to grab you a stool? Looks heavy." This time even his buddy gave him a look. Not today. But he laughed anyway because bravado was easier than backing down. Lyra's jaw tightened not at his words but at the bolt that refused to seat flush on the first try. She breathed, reset, applied patience like pressure until it yielded. The rotor head loomed above her, cathedral of steel and composite. Every fitting carried memory. Every scar told a story. And she, scars across the backs of her hands, carried her own ledger of lessons written in blood. She tapped a cuff, half-hummed a bar of nothing. Her ritual. The crowd lingered, recording slivers of her work on their phones. Mercer cataloged the details they missed, the way her tools landed in the same pattern every time, so muscle memory could find them blind. The way her shoulders settled when the pitch links aligned and the vibration resolved to zero. Skill could look like luck if you only arrived after the work was done. The engine bleed came next. Open, pump, close, repeat. Fluid hissed, settled, hissed again. She tracked the gauge with quick flicks of her eyes, storing the numbers in the same short-term pocket humans had used since before ink. At last pressure held, She nodded once alone, then she stepped back. Ready for ground run. It wasn't bravado, it was fact. The crowd thinned. Mercer stepped closer, shadow falling just outside her workspace. He didn't intrude, he didn't need to, his voice found her anyway. Replacing damaged hydraulic line. Yes, sir. She passed him the old fracture, a clean bite through the metal. Ugly, efficient. He turned it in his hand the way men turned evidence, searching for angles that weren't there. How long? Soon as I bleed the air and confirm pressure holds. A beat. If nobody bumps what I just tightened. A flicker of amusement crossed his face, almost a smile. Reflexive, gone in a blink. The start sequence began. Batteries waking the bird. Lights flickering in their ritual. Turbine whining alive. The rotor creeping, then gathering speed until the blades blurred into a halo that sliced the sunlight into bands across Lyra's face. She leaned in, listening again, felt the air on her palm, read turbulence like Braille, a tiny tremor at 60% gone by 70. She nodded twice, private, decisive. Mercer saw it, filed it. He was a man who filed everything. The hop test lifted the Black Hawk inches off its skids, settled back down, alive again. Lyra didn't smile, she didn't look for approval. She wiped a streak of grime from blade 3, leaving a bright mark against the dull paint. Not pride, just work. Good work, Mercer said. She glanced at him, testing the anchor of his words. It'll fly, she almost said, but the thought remained in her eyes, not her mouth. He turned as his radio chirped his name. Paperwork summons, decisions waiting in air-conditioned rooms. He didn't move immediately. Something about her, the quiet economy, the unspoken defiance, kept him rooted longer than he'd planned. And then it happened. The corner of her pocket shifted in the breeze. A folded envelope slipped free, fell flat against the concrete with a muted slap. Mercer's boot stopped beside it. His gaze dropped. Letters stenciled across the front glared against the dust. Classified EYES only. Operation Silent Talon. The laughter from earlier seemed impossibly far away. Lyra froze, shoulders tightening too late to hide it. She stepped forward, hand out. Mercer crouched, picked it up, brushed his thumb across the surface as if testing the ink. His face didn't change much, just narrowed the way terrain narrows before ambush. This yours? His voice was flat. No accusation yet, but the edge was there. Lyra took the envelope back carefully, fingers closing as if the contents could bruise. She tucked it into her pocket again, fastening the flap. I carry what I'm told, she said, each word weighed, unhurried. From across the yard, someone shouted his name. Mercer didn't look away from her. We'll talk later, he said, and walked off. She stood there, the rotor's echo still thrumming in her bones, the envelope burning against her chest. For the first time all day, the grease on her hands felt like camouflage. For the first time, the silence felt dangerous. She wasn't just fixing rotors, she was hiding something, and now someone knew. Why hadn't she hidden it better? That was the thought clawing at her as she walked away from the pad, tools slung heavy at her hip. Sweat stung her eyes, but it wasn't the heat that burned. It was the major's voice in her head, flat, edged, promising questions she wasn't ready to answer. Inside the supply shed, shadows cooled the air a little. Rows of hoses hung in lazy coils, filters stacked in dull plastic bags. Everything ordinary, everything exactly as it should be, except the weight pressed flat against her chest. The envelope. Silent Talon. She dropped her tool roll on the bench and began sorting. Each wrench, each socket, each clamp returned to its place. Order wasn't habit, it was armor. When the call came in the middle of a job, you needed to know where your tools were, or someone bled out while you searched. Outside, the base was alive again. Generators droned. Voices barked over the loudspeaker. But under it all came a sound that didn't belong. The rising pitch of sirens. Her hands froze on a torque wrench. Not a drill, not ceremony, real, the kind that rolled across sheet metal and made stomachs drop. Lyra stepped to the door. Across the flight line, ground crews scattered. A voice boomed over speakers, inbound bird, combat damage, tail number unfamiliar. The urgency was not. She didn't wait for orders. Boots pounded the pavement in long strides, body already leaning forward. The shed, the tools, the neat rows forgotten. The vibration of approaching rotors built in her chest before the helicopter even cleared the horizon. Offbeat, limping, like a runner favoring one leg. When it appeared, nose dipped, paint scorched, gunners hunched low, she knew before it landed that it wasn't just hurt. It was dying. The skid slammed into the pad hard enough to rattle teeth. Crew spilled out, one supporting another, dark stain spreading across his thigh. Lyra's eyes ignored him, her focus locked on the mast, on the sluggish wobble of blades that should have been taut. No one else moved with tools in hand, no one except her. Mercer was there already, eyes scanning. They found her instantly, and for a beat he could have stopped her, could have pulled rank, could have handed the problem to someone without secrets in their pocket. Instead, he gestured her forward. She vaulted onto the skid, sliding toward the mast. The smell hit first, scorched composite, cooked bearings. Voices shouted around her, medics, marshals, shouted clearance, but she shut it all out. Machines spoke louder than men. The coupling was flexing more than it should. Heat radiated from a bearing straining to survive. She leaned in, fingers tracing the line, finding resistance where none should be. Mercer's voice reached her shoulder, pitched just for her. "Can you keep it airworthy? If you give me space and parts." Her hands were already moving, wrench from an emergency kit tossed onto the pad. The agreement passed between them, without another word. Around them, chaos roared. Engines coughed alive for other sorties. Radios spat clipped reports. Dust whipped into eyes and throats. In the center of it, Lyra worked like she'd been carved from stillness. The coupling came free under her hands with a sound like a bone giving way. She stripped it, tossed it, reached for the replacement a runner shoved into her grip. Threads checked, seated by hand, tightened in smooth arcs. No wasted motion. Metal sang compliance. "Hydraulics should cycle clean now," she said, leaning back, scanning the mast. "But the dampers took a hit. This won't be a smooth ride." "How rough?" "Enough to make the pilot swear. Not enough to tear apart before you get where you're going." He weighed that, then nodded once. Decision made. The crew chief arrived, visor high, sweat streaking his face. "Bird needed for an extraction run. Hostiles closing. We've got 10 minutes, tops." The words landed heavy, but Lyra didn't change pace. She bled the line with ritual precision. Open, pump, close, check. Her gloves were slick now, dust clinging to damp spots. She didn't care. Pressure climbed, held. "Ready." The turbine spooled, rotor crawling into motion, then slicing the sky. She held her hand against the frame, feeling for tremors. Numbers steady, hiss absent. It would hold, for now. "Shut her down," she called. "We're good." Mercer stepped closer. His tone wasn't a question. "You're coming with it." She froze. "Why?" "Because if anything goes wrong out there, you're the only one who can keep it in the air." And his eyes flicked to her pocket, where the envelope lay hidden again. "I think your orders involve more than turning wrenches." She didn't answer, didn't confirm, didn't deny, just nodded once. The crew chief called for boarding. Lyra climbed in behind the pilot's seat, headset already snug. Mercer strapped opposite her, movements efficient, unhurried, like a man who'd done this too many times. The cabin smelled of sweat, dust, and faint sweetness of spilled hydraulic fluid. Gunners checked weapons, brass rattling. The pilot glanced back, got her thumbs up, turned forward again. The liftoff hit like a fist, pressing them into their seats. The base dropped away. Tents, hangars, neat rows of parked aircraft shrank into geometry. The horizon shimmered wide and merciless. Lyra leaned into the gauges. needle steady, vibrations alive but tolerable for now. Mercer's voice cut into her headset. That name, Silent Talon, never heard it until today. Then you weren't supposed to, she replied evenly, eyes never leaving the instruments. 2 minutes to LZ, the pilot cut in sharp. We've got company, fast movers, low altitude closing from the east. The gunner braced, weapon angled. Mercer's hand gripped the frame above him. Lyra's hand tightened on her support bar, not from fear, but to keep steady enough to read what mattered, the machine. Through the open door, sunlight caught something metallic in the distance, shimmer resolving into the outline of another helicopter. Enemy. The radio hissed with clipped commands, foreign voices. Mercer's tone was dry in her headset. Looks like your smooth ride just got interesting. Lyra adjusted her headset, voice steady, calm against the rising thrum. Then we'd better make sure this one stays airborne. The Black Hawk dropped low, nose skimming, dust whipping. The machine trembled, alive, defiant. And in its bones, Lyra felt the truth: the seal would hold only so long. It had to be enough. How long could one patch hold, when the sky itself wanted to tear it apart? The Black Hawk thundered low across scrub and stone, rotor wash ripping dust into whirlwinds. In the open cabin, every sound was amplified: the turbine's scream, the rattle of loose brass, the clipped urgency in voices that knew how short minutes could be. 2 minutes to LZ, the pilot said. His tone was calm, but it was the brittle calm of a man calculating chances. Lyra pressed her hand flat to the frame near her knees, feeling the tremor that lived beneath the numbers. The gauge still sat in the green, but the vibration through her bones told her the truth. Machines lied on paper long before they lied in the air. The first burst of enemy fire cracked against the fuselage. Sharp, ugly, too close. The gunner leaned into the slipstream, weapon answering in staccato bursts that rattled the entire cabin. Brass showered across the deck, tumbling out into the churned air. The helicopter banked. Lyra felt the strain ripple down the mast, the patched coupling shuddering. Her stomach knotted. We can't dodge like this for long, she said into the intercom, raising her voice over the roar. Either we punch through or this mast eats itself alive. Mercer's eyes locked on hers, steady, measuring, then we punch. He gave the order without hesitation. The pilot leveled out, nose forward, no more weaving. It was a gamble trade maneuver for speed. Pray the enemy couldn't line up a clean shot before they reached the clearing. The canyon opened ahead, jagged walls rearing up on either side. The helicopter dove into it, shadows slicing rock as rounds sparked off stone. Lyra unbuckled, slid toward the mast access. Gloves tight, jaw, every jolt threw her off balance, every bank threatened to toss her sideways, but she wedged herself into the cramped space and went to work. The coupling was hotter than flesh should touch. Her knuckles scraped raw as the wrench slipped once, then bit again. Fluid oozed where it shouldn't, a leak, slow now but growing. We've got a bleed, she shouted, voice hoarse. I can seal it, but it won't hold forever. Mercer was at her shoulder, bracing her against the violent sway. We just need forever to be 10 minutes. She didn't waste a word in reply. She tore a strip of emergency seal, cinched it tight over the joint, hands moving with brutal speed. The heat bit through her gloves, seared her skin beneath. She ignored it. The gauge steadied. Not perfect. Enough. The canyon walls blurred past in streaks of gray. Gunfire echoed, bouncing off stone, disorienting. The pilot rode the air like a wounded horse, coaxing, cursing. 30 seconds to ridge, he called. Lyra shoved herself back into her seat, sweat stinging her eyes, gloves sticky with fluid. She nodded at Mercer, quick, decisive. Done. Then the world convulsed. A metallic clang tore through the cabin, violent and sharp. Something external had shifted, failed. The helicopter lurched. Lyra felt it immediately, not the coupling this time, but the damper she'd flagged earlier, running hotter, trembling. Her stomach sank. "If we keep high speed, it'll blow," she yelled. Mercer relayed instantly. "Ease off, collective, keep her steady." The pilot obeyed, throttling back, nose lifting slightly. Speed dropped, vibration deepened. It was a trade's survival of the machine over outrunning trouble. The canyon narrowed, perfect for ambush. And then it came. Rounds slammed into the armor plate behind the gunner, shredding the edge of the door. Rock walls lit with muzzle flashes. The gunner swung his weapon, firing controlled bursts into jagged ledges, the noise deafening inside the hull. The Black Hawk jinked left, right, then forward. Lyra clutched the frame, every jolt threatening to undo her fragile repair. The damper shuddered violently, heat radiating. Her pulse hammered with it. "We can't keep this up," she shouted. "One more hard bank and it's gone." Mercer's jaw tightened, his voice cut across the intercom. "Then we punch through now." The pilot committed. Nose down, engine screaming, the bird roared through the canyon mouth in a burst of sunlight. For a moment the air was clear, bright, endless. Enemy fire fell away behind them. But the Black Hawk wasn't done reminding them who was in charge. The damper trembled, straining, each rotation a warning. Lyra held her breath with every cycle, counting vibrations like heartbeats. "Can it make it?" Mercer asked, voice low only for her. Her gaze locked on the housing, reading its every twitch. If that was the worst of it, yes. If not. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. The horizon stretched ahead, the base still a smudge too far away. The bird was flying now on stubbornness, on her patch, on the fragile agreement between machine and hands. Behind her, the rescued soldiers slumped, weapons clutched but eyes distant. The gunner fed another belt, muttering a prayer. The pilot's shoulders were rigid, sweat soaking his collar. And Mercer wasn't looking out the door. He was watching her, watching the line of her jaw, the way her hands trembled only after the wrench was set down, watching the steadiness that refused to break, even when the machine threatened to. The intercom crackled again. "Fast movers on scope, unknown, closing from the west, 4 minutes." The crew chief swore under his breath. Lyra didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the damper. Her voice was flat, calm. "If they force us to maneuver, this bird dies." Mercer keyed the mic, voice sharp as a blade. "Tower, Hawk inbound, critical damage, need priority landing. Cover us." Static, then clearance, but cover wouldn't arrive in time. The shimmer of enemy rotors appeared on the horizon, smoke trailing. Lyra felt the machine beneath her, every tremor, every plea. She whispered, not for them, not even for Mercer, for the bird, for herself. "Hold together, just a little longer." The sky didn't care, the enemy didn't care, but the Black Hawk, limping, bleeding through her patch, answered with another turn of its blades. And for now, that was enough. How many more turns could the rotor survive? The horizon wavered like a mirage, the base still nothing more than geometry smudged into heat. Every thrum of the Black Hawk's blades felt personal now, a heartbeat that might stop mid-sentence. Lyra's hand clutched the overhead strap, not for balance, but to feel the tremors crawling through the airframe. The temporary seal was holding barely. The damper, though, was a different story. Each rotation of the rotor pressed against its patience, every gust of wind dared it to fail. The intercom spat static. The pilot's voice was thin, taut. "Fast movers closing, 3 minutes out. We won't outrun them." "Then we don't," Mercer answered. His voice was steel, but his eyes flicked once to Lyra. He could read the truth in her expression. The machine wasn't their only enemy. Their own bird was fighting them too. The gunner swore under his breath, bracing as tracers slashed across the sky behind them. Enemy rotors, low and closing. The first volley snapped past the fuselage, one round chewing a fist-sized hole near the open door. The cabin filled with the acrid tang of scorched paint. Lyra's eyes darted to the gauge. The needle dipped, recovered, dipped again, her stomach clenched. She's slipping. Without hesitation, she unclipped her harness. Mercer moved at the same time, steadying her as she crawled back toward the mast access. Her tools were already in her hands. The damper was scorching hot, the rubber gaiter trembling with each cycle. She worked blind fast, wrapping another strap over her earlier patch, cinching it until her gloves smoked. Her breath came sharp, ragged. 30 seconds, the pilot called. Hold her steady, Lyra shouted. If you jink now, she'll blow. Mercer's hand was white-knuckled on the frame, eyes locked on the gauge. Every dip was a countdown. He didn't speak, didn't press. Just waited, trusting her hands more than the numbers. The base perimeter finally came into view, faint lines of fencing and hangars. Too far, too close, both at once. Friendly gunners online, the tower's voice crackled. Ground fire erupted from the base, tracer arcs slicing past the Hawk toward the pursuing helicopters. Under that cover, the pilot dropped altitude, angling for the pad. The vibration spiked once more, violent enough to rattle teeth. Lyra cinched the last strap, leaned back, eyes locked on the housing. It held, shaking, groaning, but it held. The pilot flared hard. Skid slammed the pad, bounced, bit again. The Black Hawk shuddered like an exhausted animal, turbines winding down in tired spirals. Only when the last blade slowed into visibility did Lyra let her jaw unclench. Her gloves smoked where the heat had burned through. Her palms throbbed raw, but the bird was alive. She unstrapped, stepped down onto the pad. The last sigh of the rotor washed over her face like a tired exhale. Mercer climbed out behind her, scanning the horizon before turning his gaze on her. Sharp, demanding. "You didn't just keep a helicopter alive," he said. His voice was low, meant for her alone. "You kept people breathing. That's not in any maintenance manual." She glanced at the Black Hawk, still trembling faintly as turbines bled off. "Machines are predictable if you listen. People," her eyes flicked to him. "Less so." His jaw worked once, then he nodded toward her pocket, the weight she carried. "That envelope, silent Talon, I want to know what it is. Why you're carrying it on my flight line." The noise of the pad surged around them, tool carts clanging shouted orders, another bird spinning up for launch. For a moment it almost swallowed his question. Almost. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer immediately. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wasn't sure which truth he'd survive hearing. "Orders," she said finally, her voice low enough to vanish in the roar. "Not from here, and not for anyone else's eyes." Before he could press, a shadow slid across them. A man in plain fatigues. No patch, no unit, standing too still for a random passerby. His radio clicked once. Then he walked away, disappearing between hangars. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "One of yours?" Lyra shook her head. "Not mine." The air between them tightened, heavy with things unsaid. Finally Mercer leaned closer, voice flat. "We're going to have that talk, soon." She adjusted her satchel strap over her shoulder, the envelope pressed deep inside. Her reply was quiet but edged. "Then you'd better decide whose side you're on before we do." She walked away, disappearing into the hangar's shadow. Mercer didn't follow. He stood there on the pad, heat burning sweat into his collar, staring at the pocket where the envelope had been. His radio barked his name, dragging him toward briefings and reports, but his mind wasn't on the paperwork. It was on her. On a mechanic who didn't act like a mechanic. On an envelope stamped with an operation name no one had ever spoken aloud. On the feeling that a war he thought he understood had just shifted beneath his boots. Inside the hangar, Lyra rolled up her sleeves higher, hair pulled, surrounded by junior techs hanging on her clipped instructions. She taught them like someone on borrowed time, each motion efficient, no wasted words, no warmth. She could still feel Mercer's stare, could still hear his voice. "Silent Talon." It wasn't just an operation, it was a weight, one that would not let her go. And the choice, when it came, would not be about machines. It would be about trust and survival. Who decides who gets to watch and who gets to move unseen? The base never slept, but sometimes it pretended to. By late afternoon, the light slanted low across the hangars, shadows stretching long and sharp. The air was a mixture of jet fuel, hot rubber, and the kind of dust that clung to sweat like a second skin. Mercer leaned against a window on the operations building's second floor, headset forgotten around his neck. Below, on the maintenance line, Lyra stood with her sleeves rolled higher, instructing a half-circle of younger techs. Her hands moved quick, efficient, teaching them how to keep their fingers intact when threading safety wire near a live rotor. She didn't smile. She didn't soften her tone. She taught like someone with no time to waste. Mercer studied her with the same intensity he used on terrain maps. A mechanic who worked like a surgeon. A woman carrying an envelope that didn't belong on a flight line. And a silence in her eyes that he recognized. The kind silence soldiers carried when orders ate more than they gave. The door opened behind him without a knock. Captain Rock, intelligence liaison for the sector, walked in with that half-smile that always seemed to hide more than it showed. "You looked like you'd seen a ghost out there," Rock said, shutting the door softly. Mercer didn't turn. Ever heard of Silent Talon? The smile stayed. The eyes changed. A tightening, subtle, like someone closing a door in their head. "Where'd you hear that?" "Off a document I shouldn't have seen," Mercer replied. "Carried by a mechanic who doesn't act like a mechanic." Rock didn't answer directly. He picked up a folder from the desk, flipped it open, scanned it as if it were a grocery list. "If I were you, I'd stop looking at things that aren't your responsibility." Mercer finally turned. "She just kept a crippled Black Hawk alive through enemy fire. That's my responsibility." The folder closed. Rock slid it back onto the desk and headed for the door. "Then do your job, Major, and let other people do theirs." The door shut. Mercer's jaw flexed once. He looked back down at the line. Lyra was gone. Not gone, moving. In the back of the hangar, half in shadow, she packed a narrow satchel. A flashlight, 2 canteens, tools small enough to hide, and the envelope tucked deep in the side pocket. Her hands hesitated once, brushing the seal. She could feel Mercer's voice still ringing in her chest. "You're the only one who can keep it in the air." He noticed details. That made him dangerous. But he'd also taken her word in the canyon without question. That made him something else, too. Footsteps crunched on the gravel strip outside. She didn't turn until the voice came. "Heading somewhere." It was the sunburned mechanic, the heckler, only now no grin, his name patch finally clear. "Not your concern," she said. "Fair enough." His eyes flicked to the satchel. "Whatever's in there, Intel's been watching you since you landed. Might want to change your route." She studied him for the first time, really studied him. No smirk now, just weariness, and something closer to respect. "Why tell me?" "Because I saw what you did out there, and because I've been on the wrong end of that kind of watch before." She slung the satchel over her shoulder. "Then you know I can't stop moving." She slipped out the side door, into the narrow service lane behind the hangars. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of fuel and the beep of a lazy forklift moving rotor blades. Halfway down the lane, she froze. Mercer stood against a stack of crates. Jacket off, just fatigues and a plain t-shirt, looking less like an officer and more like a man waiting. "You planning on disappearing?" he asked. "That was the idea." "You still haven't told me what's in that envelope." Her eyes scanned the lane, the shadows, the cameras. "If I tell you, you can't unknow it, and if you know, you'll have to choose a side." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Maybe I already have." Before she could answer, movement at the far end. 2 men in unmarked fatigues rounded the corner, radios pressed to their mouths. Not MPs, not ground crew. Their pace quickened when they spotted her. Lyra glanced at Mercer once, then tilted her head toward the maintenance apron. If you're coming, move now. They slipped into the cluttered back end of the base, weaving through stacks of dismantled rotor assemblies, gutted avionics, skeletal airframes stripped for parts. The main pad noise faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of distant turbines. Beyond the far gate lay the auxiliary strip, half forgotten, weeds pushing through cracked concrete. At its edge sat a single black hawk, rotors tied, nose pointed toward the open sky. Mercer stopped short. "You're not thinking." "It's the fastest way out," she cut in, "and I'm the only one here who can fly her without a full crew." He stared at her for a beat, then shook his head with a humorless smile. "This is insane." "Insane would be staying," she said, untying the rotor straps. Behind them, faint but growing, the thrum of distant rotors carried on the wind. Lyra looked up. "We've got 5 minutes, maybe less." Mercer climbed into the crew seat without another word. Strapping in felt like a decision. Lyra's fingers moved fast over the start sequence, flipping guarded switches, watching gauges ripple alive. The Black Hawk stirred, hungry. At the far end of the strip, 2 figures appeared between supply sheds. Not MPs, not ground crew. Radios pressed tight, eyes locked on them. "Straps on," Lyra ordered. Mercer yanked his harness tight as the turbines screamed into full life. The figures broke into a run. One reached for a sidearm. Lyra lifted off before they closed the distance. Skids cleared the ground in a violent upward jerk. Rotor wash blasted the strip into a storm of dust, blinding pursuit. The hawk banked south, climbing hard. Mercer checked the horizon, eyes narrowing. "We've got a tail, small, fast, low altitude." Lyra didn't look back. She didn't need to. She trusted the edge in his voice. "They'll try to force us back to the base. We stay low, use terrain." The nose dipped, altitude dropping until the shadow of the hawk skimmed dry riverbeds. The earth rushed beneath them in fractured glimpses, scrub, rock, sand. The patched damper vibrated beneath her seat, warning again, flying on borrowed time. Mercer glanced at her across the cabin. He didn't ask if it would hold. He already knew the answer. They had minutes, maybe less. And the envelope at her side was no longer just paper. It was weight, direction, destiny. And everyone wanted it. How far could one secret drag them before it broke them both? The Black Hawk knifed low over the desert, rotors kicking up spirals of dust that curled behind them like ghost trails. Lyra's hands were steady on the controls, but her chest was a knot. The patched damper rattled beneath her boots, warning with every rotation. Mercer leaned forward in his harness, scanning the horizon. Tail still there, small, fast, military pattern. She didn't look, didn't need to. The vibration in the stick told her what her eyes didn't. They weren't flying free. "Terrain will break line of sight," she said, dipping the nose toward a jagged ribbon of canyon. The walls rose fast, stone swallowing sky. The hawk dove in. Air thinned, cool shadows wrapping them, sound into a roar between rock faces. Dust plumed from their skids. Mercer kept his eyes on the ridges above. "You know they'll try to box us in." Lyra's lips pressed tight. "Then they'll have to catch me first." She rolled the hawk hard left, hugging the canyon wall. Rotor tips shaved air so close to rock that Mercer's gut clenched, but her face never changed. Calm, focused, as if the machine wasn't just steel, as if it were an extension of her bones. The first echo of enemy rotors reached them, louder, closer, not 1-2. Mercer's voice cut through the intercom. "They've split, one behind, one ahead." Lyra's eyes flicked to the gauges. The damper trembled in protest. Push harder and it might snap. Pull back and they'd be pinned. Her hand hovered over the throttle, teeth gritted. "Tell me something, Major. You trust me." The question caught him mid-breath. His jaw clenched, then eased. "I strapped into this bird, did I?" That was enough. She yanked collective, pulling them into a vertical climb so sudden the hawk groaned in protest. The canyon walls blurred, closing in, then dropped away as they burst into open sky. The enemy helicopter waiting above overshot, banking too wide to correct. Lyra shoved the nose down, diving behind it. Mercer's voice was sharp. That was necessary, she cut in. The tailing bird, though, wasn't fooled. It climbed with them, locking into pursuit. Rounds chewed the air around them, snapping past the cabin. The gunner's mount rattled in reply, tracer fire stitching the sky. Lyra banked hard right. The patched damper screamed, vibration flaring through the stick like a living thing. Her knuckles whitened, breath hissing between teeth. Mercer's hand shot to her shoulder, steadying her as she fought the machine. It won't hold. Then we don't give it a choice, she said. The canyon widened into a basin. Open ground, no cover, perfect kill zone. Mercer saw it too. We won't outrun them here. Lyra's jaw set. Then we make them chase what they can't catch. She dropped the hawk to 20 feet above the basin floor, skimming so low the shadow blurred beneath them. Dust hammered the windshield. The pursuing bird followed, spitting fire that chewed earth into fountains behind them. "Gunner," Mercer barked, "give me a burst 3 o'clock." The gunner leaned, unleashed a spray that forced the pursuer to bank wider. Seconds, that's all it bought. Lyra's eyes narrowed. Ahead the basin funneled back into another canyon, but narrower. "Hold on," she whispered. The hawk slid into the crack like a blade through cloth. The walls were close enough to touch. The rotors seemed too wide, yet they threaded the path by inches. Stone screamed past. The enemy followed. Lyra felt the damper vibrate, hot enough to burn through steel. She leaned into the stick, whispering to the machine as if it could hear. "Not yet, not yet." Mercer's gaze flicked to her, not just at the words but at the way she said them. As if she wasn't piloting, as if she was pleading. The canyon spat them out into daylight. Ahead the land broke into jagged ridges, thin trails winding like scars. Lyra banked toward them, low and fast. Behind, the enemy bird wasn't so lucky. It clipped a ledge in the tight canyon, rotor shearing sparks. The explosion thundered through stone, smoke curling into the sky. But the second one, the one that had overshot earlier, was waiting above the ridges. Mercer swore, eyes locking on the shimmer of its rotors. "They're hurting us." Lyra's hands tightened. She could feel the truth of it. She angled the hawk into the ridges, threading a path no chart would ever recommend. Stone flashed close on both sides, the patched damper howling, every bump threatening to rip the machine apart. Mercer leaned close, his voice low, urgent. "What's in that envelope, Lyra? What makes them hunt you like this?" Her breath caught, her eyes stayed forward. Silent Talon isn't an operation, it's a list. A list. Names, people embedded where they shouldn't be, people pulling strings. Her voice cracked once raw, "And I'm not supposed to deliver it, I'm supposed to erase it." Mercer stared, the air between them heavier than gunfire. "Then why carry it?" "Because once it's gone, so are the lives attached to it." The words hung in the cabin, louder than the turbines, heavier than the vibration beneath their boots. Mercer's jaw locked. "So you're running?" She shook her head. "No, I'm waiting, for someone who will choose the right side when they see it." The ridges opened into a plateau. Sun blazed, merciless. The enemy bird swung wide, lining up, closing fast. Lyra's grip tightened. The patched damper trembled on the edge of failure. She whispered again, to the machine, to herself, maybe even to him. "Hold together, just a little longer." The hawk surged forward, not because it wanted to, but because she asked it to. And behind them, death followed. Who do you trust when every uniform might hide another enemy? The plateau stretched wide and merciless, heat shimmering like a mirage. The Black Hawk skimmed just above the baked earth, rotors hammering the air. Lyra's hands worked the stick with the precision of a surgeon, every movement controlled, every vibration measured against the patched damper's fatting strength. Mercer's gaze stayed on the horizon. The second pursuer was closing, dropping altitude to cut them off. "Options?" he asked. Lyra's voice was flat, threaded with strain. "Few, and none of them good." The intercom crackled, ground tower, voice urgent, clipped. "Black Hawk, identify. You're not cleared for this airspace." Mercer leaned toward the mic. "Tower, this is Major Mercer, flight priority. We're engaged with hostiles. Request immediate corridor clearance." Static, then a pause too long to be simple confusion. "Negative, Major. You're ordered to divert to grid sector 7. Escorts inbound." Lyra's eyes flicked to him. Escort wasn't help. Escort was control. "They know," she whispered. The pursuing bird fired a warning burst. Rounds kicked dirt fountains just off their nose. The message was clear. Push them toward Sector 7 into hands waiting. Mercer's gut clenched. He had been an officer long enough to recognize a trap when one spoke through a radio. He looked at Lyra. She was already watching him, reading the same truth. "This is it," she said. "You either hand me over or you don't." The words cut sharper than the gunfire. He thought of Rock, the intelligence officer with the half-smile. Of the plain-clothed man who had watched Lyra from the hangar shadows. Of orders that didn't smell right, not when blood and sweat had just kept a crippled machine in the air. His hand moved to the mic. He keyed it, voice hard. "Tower, divert, we're taking her home." Lyra exhaled once, tight, almost soundless. Relief, maybe. Or maybe just confirmation that he'd crossed the line with her. The tower's voice returned, sharper, colder. "Major, you're off protocol. Divert now or you will be considered hostile." The pursuing helicopter fired again, closer this time, stitching the ground near their skids. Mercer looked to Lyra. "Can she climb?" Her jaw tightened. "She can climb once. After that she'll break." "Then make it count." Lyra shoved the collective. The Hawk clawed skyward, engines screaming in protest. The patched damper shuddered like it would rip free. Mercer gripped the harness, praying to machinery he didn't understand. The climb put them eye level with the pursuing bird. For one brief second, silhouettes met across open air. Then Lyra banked hard left, skimming a ridge, cutting across its nose. The pursuer overshot, rotor wash colliding with stone, wobbling. The gunner on their Hawk leaned out, unloading a burst. Tracers found fuel. Fire bloomed. The enemy bird spun once, then slammed into the plateau in a rolling ball of flame. Silence followed, heavy pressing. The plateau stretched empty now. No pursuers, no escorts visible, but the radio hissed again. "Major Mercer, final warning, divert or face consequences." He ripped the headset off, tossing it aside. "We're done talking." Lyra's hands didn't falter, but her throat tightened. Mercer had just burned every bridge he had, for her, for silent Talon. They angled toward a cluster of ridges on the horizon, a secondary outpost. Not official, not charted, a place Lyra knew because of the list in her pocket. Mercer finally broke the silence. "You said Silent Talon is names, embedded people. Where?" She hesitated. Once. Then she gave him the piece that had haunted her since the orders slid across her desk. Not enemy names, ours, command, logistics, even pilots, people feeding both sides. The words were lead in the cabin. Mercer's chest tightened. "You're saying..." "I'm saying some of the men we fight beside are selling us for coordinates and cash. And the list doesn't just expose them. It condemns them. That's why they want it gone." He sat back, staring out at the shimmering horizon, his pulse a drum. Betrayal wasn't abstract anymore. It was names, faces, people he'd briefed with, laughed with, saluted. And it was his chain of command. The auxiliary outpost appeared between ridges, little more than 3 hangars and a weather-beaten strip. No official flag, no painted insignia. Lyra lowered the Hawk fast, skids slamming concrete in a bounce that rattled bolts loose. The patched damper gave a final groan like a dying animal. She cut power, turbines winding down in ragged whines. Dust swirled around them as they stepped out. The air was cooler here, wind funneling between ridges. Mercer scanned the horizon, empty, too empty. "Is it safe?" he asked. Lyra adjusted the satchel on her shoulder, the envelope a solid weight against her ribs. Safe doesn't exist anymore, but it's the only place left to breathe. A figure stepped from the nearest hangar. Older, gray streaking hair, uniform faded from sun. He moved with the easy authority of someone who'd worn command long before titles mattered. Lyra's posture shifted, not rigid, not deferential, familiar. "Colonel Hale," she said. Mercer froze. Hale was a ghost, a name whispered about missions that went off-grid, leaders who vanished from official rosters. The colonel's eyes took them both in, sharp, measuring, "So you brought it." Lyra tightened her grip on the satchel. "They tried to stop me." "They always will." Hale's gaze shifted to Mercer. "And you brought him." Mercer's hand twitched near his belt. "You know who I am." "Enough." Hale's tone was flat. "Enough to know you just burned your uniform for a cause you don't yet understand." Mercer bristled, but Lyra spoke first. "He chose. When the tower gave him the order, he chose." Hale studied him another moment, then nodded slightly. "Then maybe he's worth the wait." The colonel turned, walking back into the hangar. His voice echoed. "Come, you'll want to see what this list really means." Lyra followed without hesitation. Mercer lingered for half a breath, staring back at the Hawk, the machine that had carried them through hell, the patch still smoking, a reminder of how fragile everything was. Then he turned and followed her into the dark. Inside, the hangar was lit by a single lamp over a steel table. Maps, photographs, a laptop with no markings. On the table lay copies of what Lyra had carried, names, units, dates. Mercer's stomach turned as he scanned them. Faces he knew, officers he'd trusted, a commander who had shaken his hand just last week. Hale's voice was steady. "Silent Talon isn't just about exposure, it's about survival. If this list goes public, the machine eats itself. Command collapses, but if it disappears, the rot grows. Soldiers die not knowing why." Mercer's throat tightened. "So what's the play?" Lyra looked at Hale, then at Mercer. Her voice was quiet, almost breaking. "The play is choice. Keep the orders, burn the names, or use them." Mercer's pulse hammered. Burn it and live with betrayal hidden. Use it and risk tearing the army apart. He looked at Lyra. She didn't plead, didn't push. She only held his gaze steady, as if the weight had always been meant to be shared. And Mercer understood for the first time that this wasn't just her mission. Now it was his too. What do you do when the truth itself is a weapon? The hangar air was heavy with silence. The table between them was littered with papers, names, faces, and dates that seemed to burn just by being read. Lyra stood with arms crossed, jaw tight, the satchel strap digging into her shoulder. Mercer leaned forward, braced on both hands, eyes raking the list again and again as if it might change under his stare. Colonel Hale's voice cut through. "That's what you've been carrying. Not orders, not even intelligence. A fractured line. If it stays hidden, men keep dying. If it's revealed, the whole structure may collapse." Mercer's throat worked as he spoke. "These names, half of them I've worked with, some I've sent men under, and if they're compromised—" "They are," Lyra interrupted, voice raw but firm. "I've seen the confirmations. Supply chains rerouted, missions leaked. The canyon ambush wasn't bad luck. Someone fed them your coordinates." Mercer's fists clenched against the table, knuckles white. Rage clawed at his chest, but beneath it was something heavier. Betrayal. Hale tapped a finger on the list. Silent Talon was never about taking action. It was about burying this. The higher-ups wanted it erased before too many questions started. They gave her the order to destroy it. That was the mission. Lyra finally met Mercer's eyes. No mask now, just exhaustion, scars deeper than the burns on her hands. But I couldn't, because once it's gone, so are the chances for anyone to fight back. The words settled like stones in water, rippling the silence. Mercer dragged a hand down his face. So what are you asking me? To leak it, to spread it wide and burn everything we've built? Hale's gaze was sharp. We're asking you to decide, because once this choice is made, there's no turning back. The hangar groaned faintly as the desert wind pressed against its steel walls. Outside, the crippled Black Hawk sat cooling in the dusk, its patched damper still smoking faint threads into the fading light. Lyra broke the silence first. You think flying that bird was hard? It was nothing compared to carrying this. Every mile I've asked myself if it was worth it, if I should just obey, burn it, be done. She looked at him then, her eyes wet but steady. But I waited, for someone else to see, for someone else to share the weight. Mercer stared back at her, the room shrinking to just her words, her hands, and the envelope that had nearly gotten them both killed. For the first time in years he felt small, not because of fear, because of the enormity of choice. His voice was low when it came. If we burn it, we save the machine. Soldiers keep marching, missions keep running, but the rot stays, and more will die blind. He swallowed, the words cutting. If we use it, we expose everything, and maybe we tear it all apart. Lyra nodded once. That's the truth. There's no clean way out. Hale stepped back into shadow, saying nothing more. The choice wasn't his. It never had been. Mercer lifted the envelope. It felt heavier than steel. He turned it over in his hands, staring at the seal like it might brand him. His voice cracked once, barely audible. What if I'm wrong? Lyra stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on his wrist. Not guiding, not pushing, just anchoring. Then at least you chose, and not everyone gets that chance. Time stretched. The desert wind moaned against the hangar walls. A single bulb hummed above them. Finally, Mercer exhaled, a long, ragged breath that felt like it pulled years out of him. We use it, he said. Lyra closed her eyes just for a moment. Not relief, not triumph, something quieter, acceptance. Mercer pulled the papers free, sliding them across the table to Hale. Get them where they need to go. Quiet, piece by piece. Don't let command see the whole picture until it's too late. Hale nodded once, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, respect, maybe, or the recognition of another soldier willing to step into ruin for the sake of others. Lyra's shoulders sagged, tension bleeding away, but not all of it. It never would. She looked at Mercer, her voice softer now. You just changed your war, you know that, right? He managed a thin smile. Maybe, or maybe I just finally saw the one we were already fighting. The hangar fell into quiet again. The papers sat between them, names glowing faintly under the lamp like coals waiting for breath. Outside, the sky bled from dusk into night. Stars pushed through one by one, uncaring, eternal. The Black Hawk rested in silhouette but standing, its blade still. Lyra walked out first, standing beside the bird. She laid one hand on its battered skin, whispering something only the machine would hear. Mercer joined her, eyes on the horizon where distant lights marked bases, towns, battle lines. He spoke without looking at her. You ever think about what comes after all this? She didn't answer immediately. She let the silence breathe, let the wind carry it. Then softly, after this there's only what we choose, nothing more. They stood there a long while, side by side, not speaking. The night wrapped them in stillness, and for once there was no pursuit, no order barking in their ears, no vibration threatening to tear the world apart. Just two soldiers, and a secret that would reshape everything it touched. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.